Hello and welcome to the final session of an introduction to book history. This is a session that I have titled very aptly Doing Book History. How might one do book history in the Indian context? How can book historical methods help us to ask new questions about our literary and cultural histories? To this end, I will offer you few examples drawn from scholarship done in and on India. Now, the first example that I'll be drawing upon is perhaps quite self-explanatory. I'll be talking about the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Jadavpur University, established in 2003, which has conducted some pioneering work in both book history and digital humanities in India. Now, if I may quote the agenda of the school, which I'm sort of drawing from their own website, their agenda includes editing manuscripts and printed texts, especially those requiring multidisciplinary inputs in electronic and print form, preparing databases, bibliographies, concordances, indexes, hand lists, location registers, and other reference tools and search engines for cultural and textual studies. Studying the history of publishing and the printing press, especially in Bengal and in India as a whole, recording oral literature, oral history, interviews and other material, collection of ephemera, political and commercial publicity material, and so on. And of course, publication is also a part of their agenda. But as you can see that this is interdisciplinary in nature. The school is interested in archiving resources, and it has in fact considerable holdings ranging from early Bengali books and street literature to that of digitized and original private collections of eminent individuals, such as the filmmaker Tapan Sinha. It has put together some magnificent work in digital humanities in putting together, and if you look at your screen right now, I have a screen capture from the Bichitra website. So they put together the complete works of Tagore online in a searchable format, which again is extraordinary work. It has 47,520 scanned pages of Tagore manuscripts in Bengali and English with transcription. So this is the kind of work that they do, and of course their stated agenda includes the study of print and printing presses. Another fascinating project that I would like to point to is the 2 Centuries of Indian Print project at the British Library. Now, this project, if I may draw upon the words of those who made it possible, so Dr. Noor Sobers Khan, who was the principal investigator, Dr. Priyanka Basu, the project curator, Tom Derrick, digital curator, Olivia Mujumdar, project cataloger, Paramdeep Khera, project support officer. They had written this blog piece together for the Shanglab Journal, and I'm quoting from there. Now, theirs is a research and digitization project in collaboration with the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Jadavpur University, the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore, and the SOAS Library in London. It is an extensive and rich repository of rare printed Bengali, Assamese and Sylheti books, of which approximately 1800 titles have now been digitized and made available online. This international collaborative project has been running for 5 years now, with funding from the HRC Newton Bhabha Fund and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, UK. Focusing on early printed books between 1714 and 1914, the project's key aims have been towards complementing digitization and research with skills sharing, capacity building, and working with Indian institutions. So they've held symposia, they've held workshops, and since last year, they of course have a South Asia seminar series, which you can find it on YouTube and SoundCloud, which it offers a research platform for doctoral students, early career academics, and senior scholars. Now, they also mentioned that, since last year especially, in the climate of continuing uncertainties due to the COVID-19 pandemic, The online digital collection of 2 centuries of Indian print has been a valuable resource for researchers who are unable to travel and access the physical collections at the British Library, owing to intermittent lockdowns and restricted opening of the reading rooms. Or, for people like us, even if we manage funding, entry into the UK at the present moment might itself be difficult. And so, therefore, this project they've done through its research, its cataloguing, its digital humanities aspects, they've incorporated some vital aspects of decolonization with respect to the colonial archives. And to offer you some example of the kind of work they've made possible, they've digitized the quarterly lists, which used to record all books published quarterly and by the provinces of British India between 1867 and 1947. This is a screenshot from the kind of work that they have done. Now, it is available online on their website. Tom Derrick, who is the digital curator of the project, has actually written about it, saying that this quarterly list, they've had these catalogues in their holdings for a while, but now digitized for the first time, they have applied optimal character recognition to the lists to create Alto XML for every page, which is designed to show accurate representations of the content layout. Now, what this does is that it enables researchers to apply computational tools and methods to look across all 100,000 pages, 100,000 of the lists to answer their questions about book history. Researchers are able to examine a rich seam of bibliographic data about books published throughout India, including the name and address of printers and publishers, price of publication, and how many copies were printed. So, for instance, on your screen, the screenshot is it's from the heat map that they had produced, just as a sample of what kind of work that can be done. This is for a very short period, but what they did was precisely they'd used the data made available to map where the printing presses were taking off, and because they're interactive in nature, as you can see from the screenshot, they also share information about how many books they published, how many editions they've been managed to obtain, average prices of their books, which offers a lot of information to the scholar of the book, trying to understand, trying to ask questions about, say, a particular press, or perhaps a particular location, or perhaps the average price of books, so on and so forth, or how many copies a book sold. All these questions are made possible. Of course, the presence of computational tools and this kind of a larger database makes possible for us to ask certain questions that would have perhaps been very difficult if one were to work simply by hand. And speaking as someone who once sat in the same library and made notes by hand about circulation and printing data from the Bengal Library catalogues, a searchable archive opens up new vistas of research. It makes possible asking questions that I couldn't have thought about at the time. Now, if the aforementioned projects, the Bichitra at the School of Cultural Texts and Records, or at the 2 centuries of Indian print in the British Library, are ones that necessarily require both financial and human resources. Both have received considerable grants, as is evident. Then the examples I'll offer below, following this, represent a more traditional form of individual scholarship. And the first example that I'll draw upon is Vijit Gupta's fantastic essay, which is called What Really Happened Under a Tree Outside Delhi, May 1870. Now, as the title of the essay must make evident, it is a rejoinder to Homi Bhabha's 1985 essay, Signs Taken for Wonders, Questions of Ambivalence and Authority Under a Tree Outside Delhi, May 1870. Ever since its publication in Critical Inquiry in 1985, this essay has been a classic of post-colonial studies. It is a staple in postgraduate courses in Indian universities. The narrative centers around the figure of the Indian missionary Anand Masi and a group of villagers gathered around the Bible, somewhere around Delhi. Now, to Bhabha, the image of the Indian villagers gathered around print and manuscript copies of the Bible becomes a very important one. He sees in the English book an insignia of colonial authority, quoting here, and a signifier of colonial desire and discipline, but also a much more ambivalent text of authority. Bhabha's formulations about hybridity, derived in this essay from this narrative, in his analysis of this particular event, is a familiar one. The villagers resist baptism and put the project of conversion in an impossible position. Anand Masi lifelessly repeats chapter and verse to participate in one of the most artful technologies of colonial power. Again, this is a very familiar tale. Gupta asks, for the historian of the book, however, the essay leaves a large number of questions tantalizingly unanswered. What were the books? Where did they come from? By what route or process did they reach the hands of the villagers? And most importantly, why were the villagers carrying so many copies of the Bible? Now, these are questions that have not been particularly significant to Bhabha or to those who have drawn upon his formulations of hybridity. But what Gupta does here, from the perspective of a book historian, he traces the circulation of the missionary books from Srirampur and across the Hindi heartlands, locating the characters involved in this journey, the requirements, why and in what language, so on and so forth. It locates, his work locates Anand Masi, who was pre-conversion named Paramanando, and or Paramanand rather, and his entire journey towards being attracted to Christianity, towards conversion, and the identity of the villagers gathered around that Bible. Now, in the process, Gupta questions Bhabha's evidence, pointing out that the extract he quotes in the essay is a compound of two different accounts separated by nearly a week in time, and that Bhabha omits Masi's next meeting with the villagers, which happened the next day. Now, going by that evidence, it appears as though the villagers had complaints to raise about the king's oppression, rather than discussing, religious questions or philosophy or theology. That was probably less on their minds than their complaints about oppression that they had to make. So far from being passive players enacting a mask of mimicry, the villagers are actually found to be members of the Sadh sect, who had in fact gathered there not for some mysterious reason, but for their annual assembly in the month of March, which that year was in Delhi. Now Gupta writes, Bhabha asks, and what of the native discourse? Who can tell? And what is the significance of the Bible? Who knows? In Bhabha's formulation, these rhetorical foreclosures do not admit the possibility of answers, but in more material modes of historical investigation, they certainly do. True, the discourse of the Sadhs is filtered by a missionary consciousness, but in all accounts they seem serenely untroubled by the coming of new gods or books into their lives. And in the long run, they frustrate missionary expectations that they would be an easy graft for Christianity. Of course, Gupta has a lot more to say in the essay, which I'll not flatten in this brief space. But his essay is a case in point about what book historical methods can achieve, even in arenas very familiar to literary historical scholarship. The Bhabha essay is, again, as I mentioned, it's a staple. His formulations about hybridity are very well known to us. But Gupta takes on that very familiar anecdote from his essay and explores a completely new dimension using these methods, these questions asked by the book historian. I'll draw another example, this time from my own work, if I may, to point out how book historical methods can help us ask new questions from familiar narratives. Now, this one features a familiar narrative about Bharatendu Harishchandra, who of course is one of the foremost figures of Hindi literature in the 19th century, and his ties with Calcutta and his deep and abiding friendship with luminaries in Calcutta such as Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Vidyasagar is on the screen. On your left you have Bharatendu and on the right you have Vidyasagar. both luminaries, both very significant figures in the emerging or in the so-called rise of modern Hindi and Bengali respectively. Now, this friendship is a well-known story. We know that before the establishment of the printing presses of Benares in the 19th century, books, even if they were initiated in Benares, conceptualized in Benares, they were usually printed in Calcutta. We also know that the Bengali diaspora contributed very significantly to the establishment of a thriving culture of print in Benares. But there is a lot more to this story and ties even deeper than that. The emergence of Benares as the pulsing heart of Hindi print really happens with the emergence of the figure of Bhartendu Harishchandra in the final decades of the 19th century. Now, there are enough life stories that tell us that Harishchandra saw his first Bengali play in Calcutta and began to learn Bengali, which made available to him a wealth of new ideas and literature. There are also stories about his association with Mallika, a young Bengali child widow. The historian Vasudha Dalmia has said that the relationship with Mallika spilled into his literary life as well. She was literate, sensitive, and interested in the issues of the times. She helped in translations from the Bengali, composed poems herself, which were published along with his, and wrote novels in a Hindi colored strongly by the Bengali idiom and much influenced in its themes by Bankim Chandra. Though she could never be acknowledged publicly, since her name never appeared on her publications, she participated in his public activity in that she published along with him. In fact, last year, Benares Hindu University was close to publishing works by Mallika before, of course, the pandemic struck. I don't know if they've been managed to publish the volume ever since or if it's been stalled by the pandemic. But anyway, so Harishchandra's ties with the Calcutta public sphere and the print cultures of Calcutta went even deeper. He was in regular touch with Raja Rajendralal Mitro, who was variously connected with the Asiatic Society. So Harishchandra was accept a number of his theories and views on the history of the Vaishnavas as propagated in the monumental The Antiquities of Odisha. Another important point of contact for Harishchandra was Vidyasagar. Harishchandra, and I'm quoting Vasudha Dalmia here, knew Vidyasagar personally, and the two men referred to each other with affection and respect. Vidyasagar made use of the vast resources of Harishchandra's manuscript library, the Saraswati Bhandar. He was to thank him publicly for the use of this library in the preface to his edition of Kalidasa's Shakuntala. Vidyasagar was also, and I cannot stress this enough, a printer and a publisher. He owned the Sanskrit press and had contributions to the development of print culture in Calcutta, again whose significance cannot be stressed upon enough. Vidyasagar, a Brahmin Pandit trained in the manuscript tradition, was a product of the Sanskrit college. He, like his colleague Madan Mohan Tarkalankar, with whom he opened the Sanskrit press, had been an employee of the Fort William College and the Sanskrit College. Now, as Brian Hatcher has pointed out, during the colonial era, Sanskrit Pandits experienced a range of transformations in their intellectual practices, modes of employment and socio-political activities. Numerous Pandits like Vidyasagar had found their way to Calcutta, where some carried forward patterns of traditional Sanskrit education, and others entered the service of the colonial government as professors, judges, and low-level administrators. Now, as employees of the Fort William College, Vidyasagar had witnessed firsthand the proliferation of print in the Calcutta-Srirampur region. So, in a figure like Vidyasagar, a pioneer of Bengali print, we witness a curious dimension of the encounter between the manuscript tradition and the coming of print. For instance, the very first text that the Sanskrit press published was a new edition of the Mangal Kavya, the Annada Mangal, which, in Vidyasagar's own words, had been originally printed by other publishers, lesser publishers, in poor quality paper and bore a considerable number of errors. The Sanskrit press edition, on the other hand, was painstakingly produced by Vidyasagar after obtaining a manuscript from the Maharaja of Krishnanagar. Now, commissioned by G.T. Marshall of the Fort William College, the press sold 100 copies of the book at 600 rupees to repay their proprietors' outstanding loan amount that they had spent on buying the printing machine, the so-called Sanskrit Jontro, for the Sanskrit press. Now, Vidyasagar himself tells us this story. Now, his telling of this story highlights his training in the manuscript tradition and his insights into the future of print, that he had in fact invested in his own printing machine and his own printing press, as well as the considerable cultural capital he had acquired, allowing him to ask for a manuscript from none other than the Maharaja of Krishnanagar. That's what made that was the claim to authenticity, right? His familiarity with the manuscript tradition. This is something that a lot of other publishers who may or may not have been familiar with the manuscript, nonetheless could not have perhaps directly asked for an authentic copy from the Maharaja of Krishnanagar. And this whole question of manuscripts and authenticity has been explored fantastically by Tapti Roy and Gautam Bhadro. But I'll move on from that. If one were to simply pursue the life story of Bhartendu or Vidyasagar, for that matter, then the question of their ties would not extend beyond their friendship. But again, I'm drawing upon methods from book history, and so therefore, I want to point out that these ties should not be understood merely in terms of personal relationships, deep though they were, or in terms of what is understood as a somewhat mechanical paradigm of influence in literary studies, chaya, as it is called in literary critical traditions in both Bengali and Hindi. It is not simply the chaya of Vidyasagar or Rajendralal Mitro that one witnesses in the Hindi public sphere that emerges in Benares at the time, but rather a concrete material ties and the circulation of people, ideas, books and manuscripts. Bhartendu, himself born to a wealthy Agrawal household in Benares, to a father who was a poet, was well versed in the manuscript tradition and again had acquired a considerable collection of them. Harishchandra's travels to Kolkata or Vidyasagar's to Kashi, making use of Harishchandra's manuscript library while he visited his mother, who spent her last years in Kashi. The letters and the interaction between them. Rajendralal Mitra, for instance, wrote to Harishchandra, asking him to look up for dates in a particular Vaishnava manuscript. Now, it made them a part of a larger republic of letters, a public sphere that extended beyond the regional confines of Calcutta or Benares. Now, pursuing these circulations beyond the paradigms of simple friendship or chaya, and locating these figures not merely in their own literary traditions, but in their respective standings in terms of print and manuscript traditions, we find new ways even of engaging with these age-old giants of Indian literature. There's also a cautionary tale here. Now, Harishchandra's Saraswati Bhandar, the holdings of it, which was a remarkable collection, now he had handed it over to the BHU. From what I gathered in the course of my fieldwork last year, there was considerable difficulty in locating the holdings of this in the library at the present moment, though I hope by now they have sorted it out. But this poses one of the problems that I had cited earlier in Gupta and Chakraborty's exhortations, that we need to better preserve the documents that we have. Archival practices in India, for all the limitations of archives, need to be strengthened. The Vidyasagar books, for instance, Vidyasagar had a massive collection of books. He's said to have owned around 16,000 books, a lot of which he painstakingly bound. As far as I know, nothing of this collection survives, which again is a pity, because it could have told us a lot more about the cultures of reading and writing at that point of time, and could have opened up new avenues for research for scholars. But again, our archival practices, which of course something the SCTR or the projects like 2 Centuries or Centuries of Indian Print seek to amend. So I hope with these examples, and I could go on with more examples of work, but time is limited and so is everybody's patience. I hope I have been able to convey the significance and the potential that book historical methods have for scholars of literature and history alike in India. And with that, I will thank everybody and stop for the day.